All right, here you go. So explain the ending of World War II against Japan. Within your response, detail about the Manhattan Project and its significance.
You have to.
Pop it. I don't want to make it loud. I don't want to pop it. I am always.
It's like the end of the year.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's your finish it.
Well, after. Okay, after. All right, let's go. Let's get working. Let's get working.
You took like all the things I works for, and then you just took it for yourself.
Wedding, I guess, apparently. All right. We're talking about the end of the war here.
Telling me to tell you.
All right. So, end of the war against Japan. So, what's that strategy we talked about that we utilized in the Pacific theater? Try to push Japan back to the borders. Ben? Island hopping? Yes, good job, island hopping. Good. So, as we're making our way, island to island, pushing Japan back to their borders, they're losing resources, they're losing materials. And we're getting closer and closer to continue these bombing runs over many of their major cities, right? Specifically, Tokyo, which is their capital, most populated city. Today, it's actually the most populated city on Earth, which is kind of wild to imagine. But we fire rated it pretty much for the length of the war. And there's actually more deaths in these fire rates than the atomic bombs combined, which that's surprising. But it just goes to show we were bombing Japan day in and day out for this whole length of the war. And they weren't giving up, they weren't surrendering. So what were the last two battles we talked about in the Pacific Theater? They were brutal, and we invaded these two islands and tried to push Japan out of these locations that really didn't have resources, really didn't have any materials. Jason? Yeah. Yes, good job. So with Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the fighting here was intense. And there's a lot of casualties on the American side, right? When it comes to the Japanese, there's really no prisoners because they're fighting to the bitter, bitter end. And with these two battles, it kind of symbolized, explained to us that maybe we've got to end this war a little bit different, okay? And with these two battles, Iwo Jima is the famous, what photo? What photo is this here? Chase?
Plant the flag.
Yeah, raising the flag photo on Mount Suribachi. So with Okinawa, again, very intense fighting. Again, these were dormant volcanoes, so like came to the terrain, it was very loose, it was ashy, it was tough to get any type of tanks or armored vehicles onto the islands. Right? We did bombard it with our Navy and our Air Force, but for the most part, this was a taking that was very difficult because the Japanese were hunkered down in the terrain. Right? Miles and miles of trenches and bunkers dug out in Mount Suribachi and in Okinawa, right within many of the ridge lines. So this was difficult, traps everywhere. All right, what about the Manhattan Project? Explain this to me here. Austin,
It was the creating of the first, atomic bomb.
yes, good job. Who led the project, the
Uh,
science side of things?
Franklin D. Roosevelt.
All right, FDR, the President of the United States, he's the one who signed off on it ultimately. Yeah.
And then Harry Truman.
All right, well, Harry Truman then will make the decision.
Oh.
Good job. Who's a scientist that led this? Movie king. Yes, good job. Good. Robert Oppenheimer. Good. So with Oppenheimer, he's leading this charge here to create the first atomic weapons, first super weapon. And for the scientists involved, this was something again of great accomplishment, achievement. Right? But then quickly, once this thing was set off, the mood changed. Why did it change so much? Why did it change so much? You think they'd be happy about this accomplishment, right? Jason?
Yeah, destruction.
Yeah, good job, right? This changes the world forever. What was the first test that we talked about yesterday? This is the first atomic bomb explosion happened in July 1945. Brody? Yeah, the Trinity test. Good job. And with the Trinity test, this just proves that we now have this super weapon, and a lot of the experiences from it were shocking, to say the least. Right? And again, changing the world forever. Yeah, it will. All right. Where was Truman at when this test was successful? When this was set off? Right? Where was Truman at? Is that some sort of meeting? Chase?
The Alton conference.
No, not Viola. That was the FDR's last one. That was the second. We're talking now about the third conference. Jason?
Potsdam conference.
Yeah, it's the Potsdam conference. Good job. And in Potsdam here, okay, the big three met that just hash over everything from the Alton conference. How the Soviet Union's gonna enter the war to help the United States in the Pacific theater. How they're gonna divide up Europe after the war, and what it's gonna look like, right? So there's a lot to talk about. Truman's gonna take a different stance though, so how so? Is he gonna be easier on the guy, or is he gonna be a little bit harder? What do we think? Naomi?
He's gonna feel a little bit more.
Yes, good job, right? So with FDR, he kind of gave Stalin a lot of concessions here. He said, listen, we're gonna give you what you need, what you want, because we get it. Right, 27 million Soviets died in the war. I think you deserve it, right? And it's hard to swallow that pill, I get it, but you can't deny it. And, well, you think about that whole eastern part of Europe, it's gonna be a buffer zone. It's gonna protect Russia from many invasions from the west. Now, we talk about Napoleon, we talk about World War One, now World War Two. This is back to back to back. And, well, they don't want to see us out again. So for Roosevelt, he said, listen, you help us with Japan. You help us after here the Nazis defeated at the Alton conference. Right? Again, we will grant you these areas here. We want to see elections. Stalin's like, sure, but communism's gonna go. Anyway, with the Potsdam conference, Truman, what does he inform Stalin? What does he say to Stalin? Again, he's just catching wind of it too, right? Elena? Yeah, good. He said, hey, we have our hands on the super weapon. It works, and it's ready to go. Stalin just kind of, I don't know, turns his head, chuckles about it. He's like, yeah, sure. But in all reality, did he know about it? Yeah, he had spies in the Manhattan Project the whole time. So, oh, you can see the tensions rising between these two powers. Even though we're friends during World War II, after, we're already becoming adversaries. So the Cold War is beginning. Then finally, what did we talk about yesterday with the ending of the war? Did we use these super weapons? Yeah. What cities did we target? What were the names of these weapons? What do we got? Brody?
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, good job. So with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these are the two Japanese cities that we target. And well, we had to drop them on two cities because they didn't give up after the first one. So after Hiroshima, Japan was still trying to fight on. And many of their shoguns, these Japanese generals, right? These Japanese generals were saying, hey, we're not giving up, we're not surrendering. And well, let's put a Hirohito in a bad spot, the emperor. He's wanting to surrender, wanting to stop the killing, but these generals and these shoguns within Japan, right, they're pretty much threatening him. It's like, hey, if you surrender, if you give up, we're coming after you, we're gonna kill you. And this was gonna maybe lead to a coup that would just throw Japan into a flux, right? And they'd be susceptible to maybe bringing in communism, who knows? So there's a big fear here of what would happen if they would just surrender, if they would not surrender. So obviously they didn't after the first one, the second one comes around, and then shortly after they do surrender. Well, the names of the bombs, remember? Did I say them yesterday? Jason? Yeah, Fat Man and Little Boy, good job. What about the plane that dropped the bomb? First one, Hiroshima. What was the name of that plane? Eli? Yes, good job, the Enola Gang. Good. All right, and we talked a little bit about the effects here of the bombs and how with radiation and a lot of the severe burns and some of these horror stories, I mean, it's devastating. And even still to this day, we look at it and say, was this the right choice? Was this the right decision? Well, we talked more yesterday of why we thought it was. I don't know. Again, it's up to you guys. But here are your terms for today. Just two. Just two. We got the Nuremberg trials, Tokyo war crime trials. There you have it. Towards the end of class, I'm going to go over your assignment that you'll have. I'm going to have it due for Thursday. So on Thursday, I'm going to have that due. We'll probably go over it in the short time we have on Thursday. Friday I won't be here.
Right.
All right, so Friday I won't be here, so I'm gonna have either a video lesson or I'm gonna have you work on the sources for the Holocaust that I have. Right? So I'm gonna have that made for you. Either way, I'm gonna try to finish this up by early next week. Right? I know some of you are taking keystones, is what it is. Finish here strong. And then maybe Wednesday and Thursday, we'll have that locked off for the last test here. Many will probably get it done within the first period, the first class that we have. Some might take the second day, okay. Anyway, with the testing being done, we'll start the movie right after. Okay. And then when we're done with the final, we'll just finish the movie and we'll go. That's the plan for the next month.
You looked at.
No, I did not.
Yes, you did.
I gotta make sure I look at everybody here.
Yeah.
I was just so happy to look at me.
Mhm.
Ben? Excellent work. Keep it up. Maybe? Maybe hold the belt here at the end of the year? No response? All right, so now we're getting to the end of the war. So after the two atomic bombs, and this is the only time a country's ever used against another country atomic weapons, right? Yeah, sure, during the Cold War, even still today, they still test many of these nuclear weapons, see what kind of power they got, and yeah, they get more terrifying the more they test these things. So, well, I know we don't get to the Cold War here technically. I mean, yeah, we're already talking about the start of it, but you'll talk more about that, not next year, but the year after. So just kind of keep that in your minds here as we're entering here the end of the war. and talking about post-war Europe and Asia. All right, so after the devastation of the atomic weapons, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan does surrender. And now we have something that we need to try to establish some order here after this conflict. Right, this is the most devastating conflict the world's ever seen. And those that need to get punished, they need to do so in a right way. And we'll talk about these trials here a little bit more after we talk about the end of the war. So we already talked about VE Day, which is what? What is VE Day? I know I said it for the exact day. Chase?
May 5th.
No. Chloe? Yes, May 8th. Good job. So VE Day. Good. All right. So with VE Day, we mentioned about that. And well, victory over Japan Day comes a little bit later. Call it VJ Day. There you go. So it is August 15th, 1945. And again, this is shortly after the 2 atomic bomb drops. So you imagine Japan, they can't, obviously hold up to this type of intensity and this type of fighting, and maybe even more bombs that we have. Right? How many more do we have? We only had a few more left. So if they didn't surrender after them, I guess we would have had to invade. Also, the threat was that who invades? This could make things a little bit murky after the war. We asked them to help us, and we're like, well, maybe we can try to finish this off before they get in there. You know what I mean? Yeah, Russia. So this is where it gets a little iffy here. Maybe that's another reason why we use the atomic bombs. Maybe. So with the assignment that I'm going to put out here today, you guys will see that's one of the decisions. Maybe that was one of the factors why we utilized it. Anyway, with the signing, the surrender here, the official surrender, the unconditional surrender, Japan surrenders on the what battleship? I talked about it before. Chase?
USS Missouri.
Yes, Missouri, good job. All right, so the USS Missouri. The signing actually happened September 2nd, 1945, and puts the ending of a conflict, right, where the two sides come together and they agree on this unconditional surrender. All right, like I mentioned, at Pearl Harbor, so I obviously talked about the Arizona that's under the water. They also have the Missouri that's just off in the distance, which is pretty neat. You guys ever get a chance to visit Pearl Harbor, you'll get to see the two battleships, the symbolic start of the war, right? And then the ending of the war. So the Missouri, and who's that 5-star general? They call that the Terminator. He's overseeing this surrender. He'll be back. What was his name? Ariel? Yes, Douglas MacArthur. Good job. All right, so results of the war. Well, we all know that when it comes to this conflict, the biggest one, the largest one the world's ever seen, there's going to be a lot of death. There's going to be a lot of innocent people caught in the crossfire. Many civilians that were harmed in the constant bombing raids, right? But as we mentioned, we talked a little bit about the turn, right? We were in a Great Depression before the conflict, and then after, well, we're not anymore. So when it comes to World War II, it does help us greatly when it comes to our economy. The world is in destruction. Who's going to be left to pick up the pieces and help everybody rebuild? The United States, right? So yeah, we saw Pearl Harbor help to strike on American soil. Time was a territory, it was a naval base, but continental United States were unscathed again, right? So World War I, World War II, we're the country that's looked at to help rebuild. And with that, that's going to boom our economy. Well, from here on out, our Navy, our military is just going to be more advanced than everybody else by far. That's why our funding is so extreme. It's kind of unbelievable, but there's a reason for it. When it comes to controlling the seas, Great Britain was that power that was the strongest navy. Well, now we are, right? We're taking that torch and we're running with it. Still to this day, when it comes to freedom of the seas, right, we offer that protection around the world. Try to be this voice of democracy for the world. So there's a lot on our shoulders, right? And this slide just talks a little bit about the diversity here in the United States when it comes to all of us coming together during a time of need. And not only did it, right? We talked about the Tuskegee Airmen, talked about women and their role within the war. Rosie the Riveter, right? Not Bonnie. And someone say, Bonnie? Bonnie who? What? Where'd that name come from? All right. Anyway, so we also mentioned about the Navajo Code Talkers and how many Americans come together, right? I get it, we're all from maybe different racial or ethnic groups, but we're all Americans. Right, one bad thing here, like I mentioned yesterday, was Japanese internment camps. So I said yesterday about some of the pictures that you'd see, they do look like concentration camps. And with our government being paranoid and fear that we might see another internal strike after Pearl Harbor, well, FDR and his administration thought it was in best interest to take these Americans from their homes or communities, their jobs, everything, and place them in these remote locations here in the United States. So desert areas, right? They made these prisons. Okay, was there running water and electricity? Sure, but you think it was the best? No, right? These living conditions were terrible. After the war, well, you got to imagine they're going home to these areas, these communities all across the country that don't appreciate them, that still view them as an enemy, and they would get mistreated. Like I mentioned, in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan would put out legislation, or more like an executive order, giving an apology and a lump sum of money for those that are still around. And you think that's enough? You think that's an apology? No, it's not. But again, this is kind of the ugly side of a conflict like this, where we thought that this was the best decision. And it's a pretty dark stain in American history. All right, so results of the deaths here. Again, like I talked about, it ranges depending on what sources you look at. Right, more and more, it seems like these numbers are way higher. Right, this graph just kind of gives a rundown a little bit about the Soviet Union being close to 24 million, but you look at other sources, they're saying 30 million. Right, some say 27, like I said, and that's kind of the number that everybody follows along with. But you'll still see with this chart, this graph, just the sheer numbers of losses during this conflict. Soviet Union, obviously with Operation Barbarossa, the Germans coming in and taking over huge swaths of land, blitzkrieg and destroying everything in the path. Right, so that's why the USSR is way up there. We got battles like Stalingrad, right, the siege of Leningrad, which were brutal to the populations. China, which we talked a little bit about too, Japan's occupation of China, especially along the eastern coast of it. Well, this was terrifying because it was horrible in the way the Japanese treated the Chinese. So their death numbers are really high as well, as you can see. And then you can kind of see her dwindle down, right? You can see that Germany with the Axis powers, they endured a lot of the deaths too, because let's face it, they started this thing and the Allied powers are pushing all the way to Berlin, the capital, to finish this thing off. So a lot of their cities were reduced to rubble. Many innocent people were caught in the crossfire and bombing guns, which is very unfortunate, but is what it is. Here's the United States, around 500,000. So when you think about the two wars, I mean, obviously that's a big number, but comparable to other countries, we're still in good. And again, a lot of that comes with our military tactics and strategies. We try to do everything we can to save everyone, right? To make sure that we have none to minimal losses within these missions and these objectives. The Soviet Union, no, they just throw men in the gauntlet, right? They throw men, bad to say, but in the meat grinder, as they're just trying to overwhelm their enemy with shock and awe tactics. We are a lot different when it comes to our military strategy. All right, so with the Potsdam Conference, this is shaping post-war Europe and the rest of the world, right? So with Truman, he's leading these negotiations to be a little bit tougher with Stalin. Again, in Europe, try to stop the spread of communism, which he fights on early, right, with that. And then in Asia, well, now the threat of communism spreading there. So the Soviet Union, wherever they went, that's going to turn into communist-controlled areas, right? That being, well, the Korean Peninsula. So what follows World War II? Almost just right after, 5 years after the Korean War, right? And that is the threat of communism spreading across the peninsula. And if it goes there, well, then maybe Japan, and that would be devastating, right? Obviously, China turns to communism right after World War II. So they go through a civil war, and in 1949, they become another communist country. And still to this day, they're communistic. Their economy is a little different, right? They're more of a mercantilist economy. They accept capitalism in certain sectors, but when the government wants something or tells you something, you do it, right? So when it comes to communism, it's spread there. All right, the Nuremberg trials. So the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo War crime trials, this was the United States and the Allied powers, England, right? It comes to Soviet Union and France. They said, listen, when it comes to treating and dealing with these enemies of let's say the world, right? Because they were. All right, we gotta do so in a orderly fashion, right? Just executing them kind of puts us back into this old way, and maybe we'll bring on more chaotic times. We need to use this as an example moving forward, that if other countries or other, let's say, other groups decide to go in this direction, they will be prosecuted, right? They will face the realities of their crimes. So with the Nuremberg trials, this is where Germany, a lot of their generals, their officers, right, these Nazis were put on trial, and all the evidence shown from the war, when it comes to these war crimes and how they treated many of these prisoners of war, right, and the devastation of targeting civilian populations. When it comes to crimes against humanity, right, like genocide, right, targeting Jews, which we'll talk about here, the Holocaust here next. Right, so all of this was shown, all of this pictures and videos and concentration camps, death camps, Auschwitz was detailed for not just the people at these trials, but for the whole world to see. And as they're showing this evidence, well, this was kind of giving the four countries, the Allied powers, the decision of what to do after, which many of these Nazi scientists, generals, and officers were trying to put to death. So they were executed. Some, well, took a different path, like Hermann Goring here. He was leader of the Luftwaffe. So he was the guy in charge of the German Air Force and one of Hitler's right-hand men, right? And he killed himself before he was going to be put to death. So he took cyanide and died. Okay. And there were a few other Nazis that did that, but for the most part, they're put on trial, all the evidence shown, and a way to try to show the world that this is the new direction moving forward. With Nuremberg, why there? Well, in Nuremberg, Germany. Eli, you good? You're not on your phone back there, are you? Pick up your hands. Oh, okay. Lucky. Get that out from a mile away. All right, so why Nuremberg? Nuremberg, Germany is where the Nazis would hold a lot of their rallies. Early on, as Hitler's becoming dictator, and afterwards. So a lot of the crazy rallies, a lot of the marches that you'd see online, and all the other sources happened in Nuremberg. Also, it wasn't really destroyed during the war, so there wasn't many civilian or manufacturing areas there. So they decided to hold it there because it was kind of unscathed. So that's important to know. Tokyo war crime trial, same thing. We have to try to do this with Asia here, with Japan, and how they mistreated the Chinese. So the Bataan Death March, remember talking about that? Yeah, that was brought up in these crime trials. The massacre at Nanking, which the Japanese, when they went into China, how they treated the Chinese, killing over 400,000 Chinese civilians within literally a few months. I mean, this was brutal. And again, evidence shown there, try to show the world what was happening, what was going on, and that this is not going to be accepted from here on out. So who's this guy right here? Who's this guy? We talked about him with the rise of dictators. Who is this prime minister of Japan? Ila.
Hirohito.
No, that was the emperor. Remember the emperor, what you talking about? He kind of, I mean, yeah, he allowed things to go on, but after war, listen to this, they leave him in charge because they need some sort of structure. They need a means of stability. So he wasn't really committing a lot of these crimes here during the conflict. There was someone else, this guy. All that. Elena? Yes, Hideki Tojo. Excellent. Good job, Elena. Thank you for paying attention all the time. Appreciate it. I've had charge too. Never back here, ever. All right, so with Hideki Tojo, he was one of the guys here that was presented the whole time. As they're presenting the evidence, it was kind of interesting. You guys can find it online. There's a guy behind him that was listening to all these war crimes he committed and crimes against humanity under his watch and under his direction. And he's bald. So this guy just went up, smacked him on top of the head. So it was like, what's going on? And then he like flinched away, like looked back. And said, I can't believe that happened. Really? Can't believe that happened after all the harm you did to the world. Really? So you guys get a chance, maybe check out that video. Like slaps on it. All right, so we'll talk about the Holocaust here more tomorrow. Okay, I know we're getting to the 2 hour delay schedule here, so our time in here is limited. Darn, right? Darn. But with the 2 hour delay schedule, we'll kind of get through the information. I'll get the assignments out for you and we'll be good to go. We are coming to the end here. Please bear with me. Please pay attention. All right, please work on your assignments. Don't just let them slip away. Yeah. All right, so we'll talk more about the Holocaust here tomorrow. Real quick, here's your assignment. Here's your assignment. It's all about the Manhattan Project. So I'm going to publish this right now. So for you guys, now you pay attention. Honors, yeah. So I want you to read through this article. It gives you 5 options, right? What Truman was given at the end of the war. It's like, hey, we could do this, right? What do you think about dropping the atomic bomb? Sure. What about demonstrating it? All right. What about invading the mainland? All right. Well, there's a bunch of decisions here to make. Truman had probably the toughest, maybe of all time. So all I want you to do is write in the options. So start with option 1. Boom. Pros to it, cons to it. So as you read through the option, you can look through and understand, so, okay, here's the benefits to it. Here's what will be good if we go with this decision, right? And also here's the negatives to it. So I just want you to list them. You don't have to write these paragraphs or anything now, but I want you to list the pros and cons to each option. So you just put option 1, decision 1, whatever. Title it so we know what it is. I mean, obviously we can just look up and see decision. We'll put the pros and cons. Now, don't forget about the question down here. So there's this question. All right. So did Truman make the right decision? Don't forget that one, right? That one's always, people miss it. Some people don't even look at it or don't even do it. Just like some of the other assignments that I posted. Yeah. Might be looking and pointing. Yes. Okay. But don't miss this question right here. All right, next, because you're honors, I want you to read through these primary sources. So these are primary sources for the Manhattan Project. Again, pretty fascinating. And I just want you to answer these questions here at the end. Okay? Good. All right, this is due Thursday. So, Ben? Yeah? Perfect. Perfect. Is there any questions? So you got the options and the questions. Okay, don't forget it. Don't miss the one either under the option chart. Okay.